Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today to talk about how multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, can be used to improve reading outcomes. This is the expression I'm using lately to express the frustration that I feel that we know too much to be getting such low outcomes for students, to be failing so many of our students. There is a vast body of research, converging research, that tells us how reading develops, what can go wrong during the process of learning to read, how to prevent reading difficulties, and how to intervene when students are struggling readers. Unfortunately, much of this evidence doesn't make its way into schools. This is information about what works better than other things, that could help us to be more effective with all students, not just struggling readers, but students who are on track, even gifted students. This information can help us with students who are English learners, students who are speakers of language variation or multilingual learners. This information can be applied to all students across the entire school day. So the science of reading is defined within the document that you see here. And I want to encourage all of you to go and download a free copy. The PDF can be found on the Reading League's website so that you can see what's included in the definition of the science of reading and what is not included. So you can clear up any debates about the science of reading is only phonics, or the science of reading is only about dyslexia, or the science of reading isn't related to students who are English learners. You can really get a very clear definition of what the science of reading is and is not in this defining guide. There are some key findings that can help support that very essential interaction between classroom teachers and students. Everybody else's job in the education system is to support what happens between the teacher and their students in the classroom. So finding number one that I think is important is that reading is not natural. This is not something that will emerge when the student is ready. There's no such thing as giving students the gift of time. We don't have to be teaching reading in pre-K, but there are things we can be doing very intentionally, mostly relating to finding number two, relating to language, that can support students and in fact make the difference between them becoming skilled readers or not. So we shouldn't wait. We should not take a wait and see approach. Instruction is a very critical variable in whether or not students become skilled readers. The second finding here comes from what's called the simple view of reading, that at the most basic level, if we take all the complexity of reading comprehension and we sort of boil it up into two big components, there are only two capacities that students need to be taught in order to understand what they read, and that is language comprehension and word recognition. All the complexity of reading comprehension can be sort of categorized under those two broad domains. All reading, all literacy is based in language. So reading is a language-based skill. If you can simply decode, but you cannot understand the words, or you don't know what the word means in this sentence, or you can't track the meaning from sentence to sentence or paragraph to paragraph, if you don't have any background knowledge on which to attach what you are decoding, you will not understand what you read. So the simple view is not simple, it's quite complex, but it does give us a very nice schema for understanding how to teach, what to assess, and where to go if students are struggling. Point number three is something that for some reason we are still debating in spite of having conclusive evidence, that when it comes to novice or struggling readers, explicit instruction is more effective and honestly more efficient than implicit instruction, what's sometimes called problem-based learning or discovery learning, or any other term you would use for minimally guided instruction, where the teacher is taking the role of a back seat, guide on the side, just sort of facilitating learning to happen. That can work when students have lots of background knowledge and they're very highly skilled, when they've mastered language comprehension and word recognition, but it is not the path to get them to that mastery. Number 4 is what I am personally very connected to. It's very meaningful to me, and that is that most reading problems can be prevented. We do not have to have the situation that we do in this country where only about 30% of students are skilled readers in 4th grade. We can know in pre-K and kindergarten who's predicted to have that negative outcome as a 4th grader, and that gives us 5 whole years of school to change that prediction, to get a different outcome. What we do in kindergarten and 1st grade is critically important. And through kindergarten and 1st grade instruction, we can prevent almost every single reading problem. So we're going to be talking about that in terms of resource allocation. Connected to that research finding about prevention is, excuse me, just how stable reading difficulties are and just how early they are entrenched. Students who are struggling readers at the end of 1st grade have more than an 80% chance of still struggling at the end of 4th grade, 5th grade, and beyond. But students who are okay readers, not even great readers, but okay readers at the end of 1st grade, are likely to maintain that okay reader status. This is a key finding. It's not about 3rd grade summer school to get a student back on track if they fail your state test. It's about finding students at the beginning of kindergarten, the very first time you do universal screening, and changing that prediction, making sure that you organize resources and instruction in your school for those students who are not on track at the beginning of kindergarten, and spend very intentional time in KM1 so that they all, in fact, are readers when they leave 1st grade. It's a really important charge and target that I am sharing with you. So here is what I am seeing very typically at the school level, in the first row, at the district level, all around the country, that schools are satisfied with a little bit of increase, going from 39% at the beginning of the year on track to 41% at the end of year on track. And I hear educators saying, well, at least we didn't go backwards. Well, I'm here to tell you that we can do better than this. We can double the percentage of students who are on track across the school year, especially in kindergarten and 1st grade. And in fact, we must do better than this. This is not going to cut it for our students, and it's not necessary that we be satisfied with this very little amount of growth and improvement. Now, what I'm suggesting is not going to be a quick fix. You don't just flip a switch and tomorrow everything is sunshine and unicorns within your school. What I'm suggesting is MTSS gives you the framework for making significant and sometimes difficult changes about adult behavior in schools so that you get a different student outcome. I'm going to be giving you a series of reflections as we go throughout this presentation. If you are viewing a recording with a team, this will give you an opportunity to pause. If you are watching in real time, you can take notes and make sure that when you have your team with you, you come back to discuss and reflect. And if you're just viewing it as an individual, I'll give you a few minutes or maybe a couple of seconds, a couple of points along the way so that you can think about how what I'm saying might relate to what's happening in your school. So I think about multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, as a bridge between research and practice. It's the bridge that allows us to bring together what's known in the reading research, what has been found over and over and over again, with what we're actually seeing in schools. If you think the science of reading is just sort of a packaged set of practices that you can pull off the shelf and implement tomorrow and everything will be better for you, I'm sorry, you're going to be disappointed, because what MTSS is actually about is school improvement. It's about systems change. It's about contextualizing what's in the research so that it's actually doable, so that it's matched to what your students actually need, so that it is done in a way that lines up with your resources, so that it actually improves outcomes. So I think about this as a relentless pursuit of outcomes. MTSS is not something we do this year. It's not something we do for 1 year. It becomes a way of thinking, a way of looking at students, a way of solving problems within your school. There's actually a definition of MTSS that's in the Science of Reading Defining Guide. It looks like this. Just in case you might be thinking, well, MTSS doesn't have anything to do with the science of reading. Those are separate initiatives. I'm here to dispel that false belief that MTSS actually is the framework for implementing the science of reading. You might have heard about implementation science, this idea of taking mostly from the field of medicine. How do we get the good practices institutionalized? How do we get people to take their medicine, for example? How do we get them to follow a treatment protocol? How do we actually get what's known in medical science into practice in hospitals, for example? So in education, we have a similar dilemma, and MTSS is the framework that lets us bring together what's in the reading research with the needs of real students, the needs of real teachers and communities in schools, so that we get a better result for students. This is the image that I use for talking about multi-tiered systems of support. And I want to start by dispelling some misunderstandings. Many people think MTSS is the same thing as the way that they used to implement response to intervention, or RTI. So they think MTSS is just about moving students through tiers of instruction. They think it's a series of meetings or a set of paperwork that you have to work your way through. And as I've already said, that is not correct. MTSS is actually a school improvement approach or framework. It is based on the idea that we shouldn't use resources of high intensity to solve a problem that could be fixed with low intensity resources. So we think about Tier 1 instruction, classroom reading instruction, as primary prevention of reading failure, or the first line of the solution when we have struggling readers. Students spend most of their reading instructional minutes in Tier 1, the regular classroom. That's our best opportunity to line up what students need with the instruction we're providing in that large block of time, the ELA block, so that we reduce the number of students who need more high intensity resources to something very manageable, something like 20% or less. So classroom reading instruction can be conceptualized as primary prevention of reading failure. Every student is a Tier 1 student. Every student participates in Tier 1. Tier 1 should be designed to meet the needs of your students. This is not about adopting a big box curriculum and expecting students to fit into it, or delivering that whole group out of the box program if it's not matched to what students need. This is actually about engineering a system of increasingly intensive instructional supports that will meet the needs of every student. So that's why you see 100% out to the left-hand side here. A common misunderstanding is that 80% of students will reach grade level goals, 15% will score below, and 5% will score well below. That's actually a misunderstanding. In the MTSS model, 100% of students reach our minimum expectations, but how they get there varies. So the difference will be the kind of instruction. These tiers, the color coding, are about the instruction, not about the students. And as I've already mentioned, the model is about designing instruction and delivering instruction for low performing and for high performing students. What runs up the middle of this image for me is what's called collaborative problem solving, and I have that abbreviated as CPS down here at the bottom. So I'm attempting to show this as a three-dimensional cone, and what sits at the base of this cone image are the aspects of your instructional system that need to be analyzed and perhaps changed to get to the place where you have 100% of your students reaching your minimum reading expectations for each grade level. So I want to unpack each one of those system level issues. I have them listed here, 1 through 4. I have them listed on this screen as well. I'm not necessarily going to go in order 1 through 4, but I will address each one of those. This is the work of MTSS. It's not about having meetings to decide who goes from tier 2 or tier 3. It's not about delaying more intensive supports for students. It's not about a series of paperwork or hoops that students have to jump through to get intensive support. It's about creating a system where every student gets what they need with the least intensive support possible. Okay, so we're going to start with the assessment system, because to build a tiered model, you have to know where are your students now and where do you need to get them to in the future. So there are 4 key questions that have to be asked and answered to create an MTSS system in your school. The first question is, which students and systems are at risk? So which students are at risk, that's run of the mill, everybody sort of knows about and thinks about that. But which systems are at risk is the key twist that I want to make you think about here in just a minute. To answer that first question, you're going to need a specific kind of assessment called universal screening. More on that and characteristics of screeners in just a minute. Because screening is brief, it's not the only assessment that you need. The second question is, what exactly should we teach next? In the early grades, screening will answer that for you, but not as of about the middle of first grade and above. You're going to need a different kind of assessment to answer that second question. And those measures are called diagnostic assessments. This is not about diagnosing dyslexia or any other diagnosis. It means targeting instruction. The third question is a real-time question, like right in the moment, is instruction working? Should I keep teaching this way or should I make a change? You'll need yet a third type of assessment to answer that question, and that's called progress monitoring. And then you also need to answer a summative question. Looking back, did the instruction work? And that is outcome evaluation, like an achievement test at the end of the year or your state assessment in grade 3 and above. So let's talk about characteristics of each of these types of assessment. And as we're doing this, I want you to think about, if you have a universal screener, does it fit these criteria? Or if you are selecting a universal screener, here's some things for you to consider. Universal screening is like the check engine light in your dashboard. It's going to tell you, warning, warning, something's not right here, but it might not tell you exactly what that something is. So universal screening should be chosen to answer the question, which students and systems need support? So yes, we know an individual student is at risk and needs support, not on track for good reading in the future. But the systems question is answered by the percentage of students who are on track or not on universal screening. So it's telling you about the magnitude of the problem. Universal screening is universal. Everybody gets it. Everybody, even your English learners, even students with disabilities. Because you're testing everyone 3 times a year, You can't spend more than about 10 minutes per student collecting these data. That's too much time away from instruction. You want to choose universal screening tools that are standardized, meaning every student has the same testing experience, same directions, same prompt, same items, same scoring rules. You want screening tools that are consistent or reliable and also valid for assessing the skill area that you're interested in. Research has already shown us what are the essential early literacy skills. There are 5: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary and oral language, text reading fluency, and reading comprehension. Those are the 5 essential skills where we have research convergence. Those are the things we should be assessing for screening. We know that it's not likely that a student will be a reader if they're missing one of these 5. So that's what we should be checking in on when we do screening. We don't have to do screening that measures every single grade level standard. That would be an achievement test. One of the most important factors to look for in universal screening, to ask the vendor about, is what does it predict? Because the whole reason to do screening is to find out early who's in trouble, how many students are in trouble, and use that information to plan instruction that minimizes that difficulty and actually catches students up so they aren't in trouble. They're actually skilled readers. Now, it's a bonus, I think, if your universal screening tool can be aggregated, because the individual student information is helpful, but it's not as helpful as the aggregate or system level information. Let me just take a sip of water so I don't cough anymore. So what I see a lot of educators suffering with right now is what I call screen to intervene. In fact, in some states, this is a requirement that you use universal screening in this very inadequate way, that you screen students and the ones who score low go straight to a tier 2 intervention, and the ones who score really low go straight to a tier 3 intervention, and the students who are on track don't get any intervention. Well, unfortunately, it's just more complicated than this. And there are some students who score on track on screening, especially on a composite score, who actually do need intervention. And this approach, this screen to intervene, will miss those students. Here's what I also see. In many schools that I work with, it's not uncommon for 60% of the students, or 6 out of 10, to have difficulty on the screening. How could you possibly intervene with 60% of the students in your school? You can't be effective. You can try, but you can't sustain it. And you're not going to do what intervention is supposed to do, which is catch students up. And it would be impossible for you to identify the students who have reading disabilities like dyslexia in a context where 6 out of 10 or even 4 out of 10 students are struggling readers. And yet this is what I see so many schools trying to do. They're exhausted by trying to do that. There is an alternative. The alternative starts with universal screening that's aggregated to tell you the magnitude of the problem. Before you ever look at which individuals are at risk, ask how many students are at risk. What is the percentage or proportion of students in each grade level who are scoring below expectations? This sets the stage for all of your literacy improvement work. This is where MTSS starts. This is where it is different from what we used to call RTI. This is about contextualizing the reading research for the needs of your school, because you're going to behave differently in school A, where 84% of the students are struggling readers, versus school, I'm sorry, I have 2 school A's, versus school C, where only 14% of the students are struggling readers. These are 2 very different contexts. Your tier 1 instruction should look very different in school A, B, and C. Your intervention systems will look very different in these 3 different contexts. This is the piece many schools are missing. So I encourage you to take this on as a way of noticing and acting on the magnitude of the problem rather than running around trying to figure out how to intervene with each individual student. So we're going to continue on this theme in just a minute. The second purpose of assessment in MTSS is to answer the question, exactly what should we teach next? Screening will sort of put you in a ballpark of the area of concern. Diagnostic assessment is like whatever this fancy medical machine is here, some kind of a scan. It's very targeted. It's very specific. This is given to students when you are not sure what to teach next, so you don't need to give it to everyone. It is not brief. It is an in-depth assessment of a single skill area. It doesn't have to be standardized, but you don't want something that's so informal that it was created by teachers. The best characteristic of diagnostic assessment is that it is linked to instruction. The score is not as important as how the student got the score. So these assessments help you target exactly what to teach next. They are different tools for different questions from universal screening. So no universal screening tool can be used as a diagnostic, and no diagnostic assessment can be used for universal screening. It's really important that you understand this and you choose tools wisely, regardless of what the title of the assessment is, because that's where things get tricky. So I like to use this graphic. I think about this as the path to reading, using reading for learning, right? And I want to position screening and diagnostic assessment on this kind of pathway. I'm using the simple view of reading here, language comprehension times word recognition equals reading comprehension. And if you think about this, if we are trying to prevent difficulties, we're going to be teaching students from left to right. We're going to be teaching them the language comprehension and word recognition skills that they need for reading comprehension. And if we're working with older struggling readers, we can use this graphic from right to left. If they're not understanding grade level text, it's only for 3 reasons. It's because they're missing language comprehension, or they're missing word recognition, or they're scoring low on both. So the simple view is helpful in determining and targeting assessments. Screening will tell us the area of concern. For example, a student might be struggling in the area of phonics and decoding, but diagnostic assessment goes deep into that area. It's going to assess all of the components of phonics and decoding, maybe, hopefully, on a scope and sequence, and very specifically pinpoint exactly what to teach next. For example, reading CVC words would be something that could be identified in that case. So that's the way screening and diagnostic assessments work together. The third assessment purpose is to give you real-time feedback and answer the question, is instruction working? I think about this as the GPS for educators. It is brief, it is standardized. These are often alternate forms of the same tasks that were used for universal screening. In fact, if you can choose wisely, a direct assessment for universal screening, something like Acadience Reading, Dibbles 8, then you will be able to use the alternate forms for progress monitoring, and you don't have to learn 2 different assessments. The main criteria of progress monitoring tools is that they have to be these alternate forms of each other, because you need something that you can give every week. You don't want to repeat the same story or the same set of nonsense words. You want alternate forms that are controlled to be at the same level of difficulty, and they need to be sensitive to small amounts of learning over small units of time, like on a daily basis. Okay, so your first reflection questions. Do you view classroom reading instruction as the primary means of preventing reading difficulties? Do your assessments tell you exactly what students know and need to learn next? Is intervention causing students to make sufficient progress to close the gap? That is the purpose of intervention. Okay, so we've started with some key understandings about MTSS and how assessment works to build an MTSS. So I'm going to jump to component number 4 and talk about how do you use those assessments to actually build a tiered system? How do you use the assessments to get better results for your students? This takes working in teams at all levels of your system, district level, school level, grade level, and I don't have it depicted here, but at the student level as well. Teams that are collaborative and represent all the stakeholders within your system, from the school and the local community. So district teams need to have representation from district administrators and school administrators. They need to have representation from every role within the school system. That could be across different buildings. And there need to be representatives on the district team from your parent community and your larger school community. They are not representing the interests of their own child, but the interests of all children and perhaps the interests of other organizations within the school community. The job of the district leadership team is to improve reading outcomes. They do this by reviewing district level data, setting district goals for reading improvement, and then making decisions to allocate human resources, financial resources, to select materials, to provide professional development, to allocate staffing and other resources within the school, to set a budget that will allow each one of the buildings to reach the district goals, and to analyze and consider policies that might be working against reading improvement or could be helpful. The job of school leadership teams is to take those district goals and action plans and put them in place in each one of the individual buildings. So MTSS will look different across different schools within a district. School teams need to have representation from the district leadership team. So somebody sits on the school team, each school team, and communicates the district goals and takes back to the district team what that school team needs. School leadership teams also have representation of school administrators, representation from every role within the building. So classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, related service staff like school psychs, counselors, and speech pathologists, and representation from the parents group and community members. The job of the school leadership team is to find out what are the barriers in the way of teachers getting better results for their students and eliminate those barriers. That's their job. So they are working towards those district goals. They've set their own building level goals, and they're analyzing all of what I call the yes buts. Yes, this all sounds great, but at our school, ... fill in the blank. Whatever are the barriers that you would identify being in the way of operating in the way that I'm suggesting or getting better reading outcomes for your students, that's exactly what the school leadership team is supposed to be talking about. And not just talking about it, but analyzing those barriers, picking the one that is the priority and that the team actually has the resources to influence, writing an action plan to make a change and monitoring how it works. Grade level teams are like little mini school leadership teams. So they have representation from all of the school staff who service that grade level, including building leadership. They are in charge of implementing the school action plan at each grade level. And they're responsible for communicating up to the school leadership team those barriers and the needs for that grade level. So you can see how communication up and down the system is incredibly important. And that's why it's helpful to have membership that overlaps, have certain individuals that might serve on multiple teams. MTSS can't be implemented without these types of teams doing this type of work. So if you don't have these teams functioning in this way, this would be a really good starting place. Now, it's not just having the team or convening the team, but what is the team doing? This is very specific in MTSS. It's called problem solving. You might call it cycles of inquiry. You might call it plan, do, study, act. I call it problem solving, where the first step is to identify or define the problem. The second step is to analyze why that problem is happening. That's where you're generating a hypothesis, your best guess about the one thing you could change that would have a ripple effect and get results across the system. You're putting in place an action plan to resolve whatever that hypothesized reason for the problem is. And then you're evaluating in real time, is our plan working? So this is probably a familiar process to you when you are talking about individual students. You probably have some version of this that you're doing when you have a student concern. People call these child study teams or student support teams or teacher-based teams. We used to call it intervention assistance teams. None of that is necessary in MTSS until you get to Tier 3. And in fact, the part that is missing, the part of MTSS that's often missing in schools, is using this problem-solving cycle about system-level concerns. So to use the example from earlier, if you have 60% of your students scoring below expectation on the screener, that's the problem for the grade level team to sit down and analyze and come up with an action plan around. You will wear yourselves out if you try to do problem solving and write an individual intervention for 60% of the grade level. Not only will you be exhausted, but whatever you design as an intervention will not be able to be powerful enough to actually work for the student. So getting teams in place and getting training about how to think in this way. This is what I said is the backbone that runs up the middle of that triangle or cone image in MTSS, and this is often what's missing. So I want you to stop and think, are collaborative teams using data to make decisions about things like staffing, resource allocation, curriculum and instruction, professional learning, schedules, grouping, materials, so on and so on? Or is it one individual making those decisions? Are teams at all levels of the system representative of all stakeholders? Think about this just for a minute. Okay, so I've alluded to the fact that what your collaborative teams should be doing is problem solving to build tiers of instruction, to build the tiered model. MTSS is not about taking something off the shelf and sort of retrofitting students into that existing or rigid system. MTSS is about creating the system that your students need. So here's an example of some of the characteristics of the various tiers. One of the clarifications that I want to make here is that you don't need and you shouldn't have different programs across the 3 tiers. In fact, one of the hallmarks of MTSS is alignment across the tiers. What makes Tier 2 and Tier 3 more intensive are variables like more time, smaller group size, more frequent progress monitoring, more highly skilled instructor, and more coaching. It's not a different program. In fact, there's nothing more confusing for struggling readers than to experience 3 different programs across the school day. The other clarification here is that although Tier 1 instruction is for all students, that doesn't mean that all students get the same Tier 1. I hear a lot of confusion about this. And so I have a couple of graphics I'm going to share to try to drive home the point that in the MTSS model, the first task of a building or school leadership team and each grade level team is to construct the tier one that your screening and diagnostic data tell you students in this grade level need. So this is about using your percentage of students who are on track and not on track to reflect on the effectiveness of your tier one. We don't look at our screening data and say, oh, 85% of our students need tier two. That would be impossible to provide, and it wouldn't be effective. The alternative is that we look at this and we say, we cannot approach changing this outcome through tier two or tier three. We're going to have to solve this problem by the way we teach reading the first time in tier one. And that tier one instruction is going to need to include whatever skills the students are low on, in this case, phonemic awareness, letter sounds, and basic decoding. We see that from the screening data. We don't have to have an intervention assistance team meeting to figure out what tier two interventions might be needed for this grade level. We already see it in the screening data, phonemic awareness and basic decoding. So the use of screening and other diagnostic data to construct tier one is the thing that I just don't see happening. I don't see it happening often enough. This choice point that's so critical is, should we be providing only whole group tier one instruction, or should we be differentiating tier one from the beginning? Or should we be doing something that's kind of halfway in between, where we have a whole group lesson first, and then the small proportion of students who are struggling get some reteaching or pre-teaching of the next lesson in small group? What the tier one grouping format should be depends on your data. It doesn't depend on a policy about a pacing guide. It doesn't depend on a belief that students learn to read through exposure to the tier one curriculum. Guess what? They don't. So how we should group students for which parts of the ELA block is a data-based decision. Here's an example in a school that has data that looks like this. Actually, they weren't quite this bad. About 60% of the students were struggling. So for their first graders, they had too many students to just teach tier one in the same way to everyone and expect a little bit of intervention to catch up the students who were struggling. That just wasn't going to work for them. So they differentiated their tier one instruction from the beginning. They grouped across the grade level, because we don't want any classroom teacher having to plan for 3 or 5 or 7 different small groups. That's overwhelming to the teacher, and it leaves those students working on their own for way too much time each day. So what I've seen to work best is something like this example. This was shared by Sharon Dunn when she was a principal in California. She had 4 first grades. So the students were grouped in skill-alike groups across the grade level. There were 105 first graders. There were 18 of them who needed to work on phonemic awareness and letter sounds. There were 21 of them who had the letter sounds but needed to work on blending them and reading words. There were 34 first graders who needed to work on blends and digraphs, and 33 who were ready to read CVCE words. Now, this will never be perfect. Some students were on the periphery of these groups, but this was the general way that things played out. They used their resources flexibly to meet the needs of their students. So the 4 classroom teachers were instructors during this differentiated tier one. Their special educator was an instructor. The reading specialist was an instructor, and 4 paraprofessionals. One who was a special ed para, and the other 3 were hired specifically to support first grade, because the magnitude of this problem was so large. So Sharon used some building level funds to hire 3 additional paras just for the morning on sort of an hourly contract and trained them in exactly the same intervention program that the teachers were using. So these 18 students in the top left were broken up into 4 smaller groups between 2 of the first grade teachers and 2 paras. And the largest group was 33 students working with 1 teacher. So I often say differentiated small groups, but they're not always small. All the groups are not small. You want to try to get the smallest groups for the most struggling students. So this is the way flexible service delivery plays out in MTSS, because one of the goals of MTSS is to integrate all of the services working in your school. So we break down those silos of gen ed and special ed and EL support and gifted support. All of the service delivery is brought together flexibly to meet the needs of the students. Some of the students in this first grade were getting a double dose of instruction at tier 2 or tier 3. This is a double dose, not something different from what they got in tier 1, but exactly the same small group, targeted, skill-based instruction, perhaps with the same instructor at another time of day. And I'll show you in just a minute how a schedule could play out. So what I see happening, just to really be clear about this, what I see happening in a lot of schools is something that's a good idea, but it's misapplied. This is the idea of win time or what I need time. What's nice about this concept is that it usually involves some good assessments, diagnostic data to discover what students need. It usually involves flexible service delivery, so other educators pushing into the grade level to create this block of time in the schedule where everyone gets what they need. Some students get intervention, some get enrichment, is the idea. Some would get math intervention. So they've created a block during the daily schedule for reading intervention, and they are giving students exactly what they need in maybe something that looks like this: targeted, differentiated, skill-based groups. The problem is many schools who are doing win time are ignoring what students need during tier 1. And they're doing all whole group instruction, even whole group instruction for phonics, even when their data look like this. They're doing all whole group phonics instruction and expecting this little bitty bit of 30 minutes or even 45 minutes of win time to catch students up, to correct the problem. And I can tell you from reading the research, this will not be sufficient. One of the most clear findings in the intervention research is that students can catch up, but they can't do so with the same kind or amount of instruction that other students are getting. They need more time. So I'm starting to call people's attention to this with a little bit of a snarky term here. I'm calling it widen time, what I don't even need time. If you're having students sit through a 30 or 45-minute whole group phonics lesson that's on a skill that is over their heads, that they don't have the prerequisites to access, no amount of exposure to that more advanced phonics skill will cause students to learn it. And what you are doing is perhaps frustrating those students, definitely frustrating the teachers, and you are making it so that you don't have enough time during the day to do this targeted, skill-based, flexible grouping. So the alternative would be, to actually give students what they need in tier 1 and to give them a second dose of that as their tier 2 or tier 3. Not a whole group phonics program in tier one and some different program as intervention in tier two. But if you have more than 20% of your students at any grade level who are at risk or struggling readers, you might use that intervention program during tier one. Give them the first dose of it during tier one and a second dose during tier two or tier three. So let me show you how this might play out in the schedule. Here's an example from a school in Michigan. This is kindergarten, the first column, first grade, second grade, and third grade as you go left to right. Don't worry about the times out to the left here. They're probably not precise. But the concept is the grade levels staggered when they taught their differentiated tier one across the day so that other adults could push in and support that differentiation. And they staggered when the tier one small group time was happening and when the tier two time was happening. So you can see small group for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade was staggered across the day. Everybody can't teach reading in the morning. And then many of those same adults who were supporting tier one differentiation, they also pushed into that grade level to do the tier two or tier three intervention at another time of day. And those are staggered across the grade level as well. So this is not a have to, this is an example. It's just meant to be an illustration of how this might play out. You will find the solution that works for your school, but the big idea concepts are ones that I hope you walk away with, that we might differentiate instruction, especially around word recognition, from the very beginning. Our data will tell us the magnitude of the problem. We can differentiate tier one from the start. We don't have to do a whole group lesson if that's not working for our students. We can go straight to the differentiated groups and layer on a second dose of that differentiated small group instruction at another time of day. Here's an illustration of how that could look. Here I have a series of 20 instructional days, and I have two types of students. So students like student A, who have the skills to be ready for whatever is taught in phonics lesson 20. So that's what's going to be provided to students like student A in tier one. But students like student B don't have the prerequisites for lesson 20. Their phonics skills are more like what's taught in lesson one of this program. So during the tier one part of their day, they're going to get lesson one. And during the tier two or tier three part of their day, they're going to get lesson two of the same intervention program. So lesson one, lesson two. This is how you double dose students. This is how you give them more time targeted at their skill level. On day two, student B is going to get lessons 3 and 4. On day 3, they're going to get lessons 5 and 6. By the time we get to the end of 20 days of instruction, both groups of students, A and B, are ready for lesson 40. This is the acceleration that we need to provide. This is the acceleration that was designed into that tiered model. This is the double dosing, the aligned instructional doses that causes student progress to accelerate, that moves students faster through the scope and sequence so that they catch up. And the sooner you do this, the easier it will be. So the sooner you do it in every school year, and the lower grade level that you start this in, if you start it in kindergarten, if you do it in first grade, you won't have to do it in second grade and above because every first grader will leave that school year as a reader. That's the goal, identifying what it will take to catch students up. We don't just find out what students need and meet them there and accommodate them and keep them there. The whole point is to accelerate their progress and catch them up. You'll know if your tier 2 and tier 3 intervention system is working, if it is in fact causing every student who gets intervention to close the gap. If nobody's catching up with your current intervention systems at tier 2 and tier 3, it's not the student's fault. It's a signal that you need to reconvene your grade level team perhaps your school leadership team, and problem solve around how to get a better result. You'll know if what you're doing is working for every student, if it is causing student progress to be accelerated. Some more things for you to reflect and think about. Are Tier 2 and 3 interventions provided in your school in addition to effective Tier 1 instruction, or are you expecting intervention to make up for ineffective Tier 1? Are students on IEPs getting the very most intensive reading instruction? Is there a seamless system of service delivery available to all students, even intensive support, from day one of kindergarten? So the final component that I'll just touch on briefly is professional development. No one expects that you're going to be able to jump out and implement this tomorrow. What I'm talking about in many ways is doing business very differently from what you're used to and comfortable with currently. You have probably been engaging in, or at least thinking about, professional development on the science of reading. So that body of experimental studies that can support us to be more effective educators. But you might not necessarily be engaged in professional development around assessment. So knowing how to choose assessments, and then once you've chosen one, knowing exactly how to give it and how to interpret it. You may not be engaged in professional development and coaching around your instructional materials and programs. And because I don't see very many people using collaborative problem solving, I bet you are not engaged in professional development about it. But I can honestly say, after 30 years of implementing this model, that that is the secret sauce. When everybody in the school system has had training in that same problem-solving cycle, when everybody in the system, including parents, when everybody knows what to expect through step 1, 2, 3, and 4, when everybody is thinking about problems in the same way, you can be very efficient and very effective for your students. So, quick reflection: is ongoing professional development coaching available to support educators to work in teams so that you can, in fact, deliver and build an effective MTSS? If you answered no to any of these, MTSS may be helpful to you. It might be helpful to think about and learn about MTSS the way that it was originally conceptualized, to move away from thinking about it as RTI or just thinking about intervening with individual students. What I hope you will take away from this presentation and think about and talk about in your schools is, what result is your system producing? If you are not increasing the percentage of students who are on track as a result of the way you're currently doing business, I hope you'll think about doing business differently. I hope you'll consider the needs and supports for every student in your system. Your students who are identified as gifted, your struggling students, your on-track students, your multilingual learners, every single student, including those with reading disabilities like dyslexia. How effective is your system for those students? I'm happy to report that we can get just about 100%, well into the 90s, just about 100% of students to those reading expectations. But it's going to have to happen through careful and deliberate collaborative problem solving, action planning, and the use of data. So if you don't have good, solid assessments, that's a great place to start. It will help create the urgency and the need for change. If you haven't started learning about the science of reading, make sure that when you do, that you include all members of your school community, not just the primary grade teachers. Most especially, make sure that you're including your school and district administrators. If you don't have teams that are using reading data to create action plans for building MTSS, that's a great place to start. And finally, if more than 20% of your students are scoring below expectation on screening, the first and most important task is to analyze and improve your Tier 1 instruction, not just send those students out for intervention. Sarah Brown and I have written a book about these practices, so I want to make sure that you're aware of that. There's a link for the pre-order on the screen here. It will be available in early May from Solution Tree. It takes all of these ideas, puts them into plain language, and gives you lots of tools, meeting agendas, and templates to put these ideas into practice in your school. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your time in participating in this presentation. And if there's anything that I can help you with after the presentation, feel free to reach out. Here's how you can contact me and find me online. Thank you so much.